am honored to be here. Let me first say, Father, thine be the glory. I'm going to just read some poems. I think they probably will be pretty much self-explanatory. They follow my growth. I think it's growth, my spiritual journey. My background is military. My father was a career Air Force officer, so yes, go Air Force. I grew up in non-denominational Protestant chapel on Air Force bases around the country, but when we went to my parents' homes, my grandparents' homes, we attended African Methodist Episcopal churches. This is the prophetic black church, which became famous earlier this year, for speaking truth to power. My personal growth has led me to the Lutheran Church, which I was very active in for several years. My first job was working as an assistant to a pastor at Cornell University, working for Lutheran campus ministry. I worked on the Lutheran hymnal that came out in about 1985. And then I discovered liberation theology, which has influenced my thinking a great deal. I'm going to just read some poems that follow this growth. The first one is a poem about being an African-American Lutheran at a Lutheran college, much like Wheaton, I think. The demographics. This is called Church Going, and it's an imitation of a poem by Philip Larkin. The Lutherans sit stolidly in rows. Only their children feel the Holy Ghost that makes them jerk and bobble and almost destroys the pious atmosphere for those whose reverence bows their backs as if in work. The congregation sits or stands to sing or chants the dusty creed's automaton. Their voices drone like engines on, and they remain untouched by everything, confession, praise, or likewise giving thanks. The organ that they saved years to afford repeats the Sunday rhythms song by song. Slow lips recite the credo, smother yawns, and ask forgiveness for being so bored. I, too, am wavering on the edge of sleep and ask myself again why I have come to probe the ruins of this dying cult. I come bearing the cancer of my doubt, as superstitious, suffering women come to touch the magic hem of a saint's robe. Yet this has served 2 centuries of men as more than superstitious cant. They died believing simply. Women, satisfied that this was truth, were racked and burned with them for empty words we moderns merely chant. We sing a spiritual as the last song, and we are moved by a peculiar grace that settles a new aura on the place. This simple melody, though sung all wrong, captures exactly what I think is faith. Were you there when they crucified my Lord? That slaves should suffer in his agony, that Christian slave-owning hypocrisy nevertheless was by these slaves ignored as they pitied the poor body of Christ. Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble that they believe most who so much have lost. To be a Christian, must one bear a cross? I think belief is given to the simple as recompense for what they do not know. I sit alone, tormented in my heart by fighting angels, one group black, one white. The victory is uncertain, but tonight I'll lie awake again and try to start finding the black way back to what we've lost. I'm going to go from there to a sequence of small prayers. It seems to me that we all pray sometimes on the surface. We are sometimes reluctant to live our Christian faith, reluctant to live with the implications of our faith. And these first two poems are poems in which I'm trying to confront this tendency in myself. This first poem is called Incomplete Renunciation. Please let me have a 10-room house adjacent to campus, 6 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, formal dining room, fireplace, family room, screened porch, 2-car garage, well maintained, and let it pass through the eye of a needle. We all pray like that sometimes, and this is another prayer, a surface prayer, an easy prayer. It begins with something that I feel I have to explain. I heard a Lutheran pastor, Christopher Stendhal, who was the Lutheran pastor at the Lutheran Church at Harvard, give a talk once in which he said that wow is an adequate name for God, that God's name is wow. It's for inexpressible awe. So this poem is called Prayer on the Wing. Wow. I don't have time right now to offer a decent prayer. Thanks for everything. And could you extend a sort of blanket blessing? A poem a little bit deeper, a little bit. This is from a book which begins with the superficial, my own superficial faith. It's critical of myself and grows more. A deeper faith. This is called Matins, which is the canonical hour at which people who live in religious communities wake up at 2:30 in the morning to pray. Matins. 1/3 of the world is dreaming right now of food. Another third stares into empty handmade bowls, and I can't sleep for indigestion. Is this pain heartburn or the autopsy's reason for my incomprehensible death? They die anonymous. Sudanese children, Lebanese mother holding her limp, long baby, decimated villagers. They cry, what can I have done to deserve this pain, this soul-killing fear? And my Meshuggah fear, that so many should hunger while I promise never again to really eat the whole thing. That they should sleep in the open wind while I hope for posthumous anthology fame. That they should need while I lie wondering how long it would take my husband to drive me to the emergency room and how to spell relief. Jesus, I must be the smallest grain of the salt of the earth. This is, I think, one of the simplest prayers we can do, the prayer of looking at our own palms, seeing the lines in our palms and what they represent. And I'm seeing my own palm in this prayer and turning it into a prayer, seeing my palm and turning it into a psalm. The poem is called Palm Psalm. A 3-stringed lyre covered with cobwebs. A going nowhere road map with a trapezoid bullseye. My love line, my line of influence, the end of my life. Oh, magnify the Lord. I became interested in writing about people who are trying to live lives completely committed to holiness. Started being interested in writing saints' lives, and I've written about 2 saints. One of them is a man who is trying to live by the rule of Saint Benedict. He lives as a hermit in imitation of the first Christian monks who lived in the 11th century in the desert. They're called the Desert Fathers. I'll just read one of the poems about him. I call him Abba Jacob, and this is a poem in which Abba Jacob speaks. It's called The Simple Wisdom. Abba Jacob said, "There's a big difference between the mentalities of magic and of alliance. People who spend their lives searching for God have a magical mentality. They need a sign, a proof, a puff of smoke, an irrefutable miracle. People who have an alliance mentality know God by loving." Here, I read one more Abba Jacob poem. Abba Jacob is a simple man. This is called Abba Jacob Gets Down. Abba Jacob said, "There was once a desert father who had a bad novice. One day the novice died and went to hell. That night the Abba went into ecstasy. He had a vision of his novice surrounded by fire. 'My son,' he said, 'I pity you for being there.' 'That's all right, Father,' the novice replied. 'I'm sitting on 3 bishops.'" The other saint I've written about is George Washington Carver, the great scientist who invented so many important things which we are still learning to appreciate. He made out of peanuts, he made gasoline. He made gasoline, motor oil, diesel out of peanuts. But he was a seriously spiritual man who I think probably was a saint. And I read 2 poems about him. This first poem is called Coincidence because I'm not really sure if Carver was involved in this incident. It happened during his lifetime on a route he took very often on the train. It happened in 1898. I found it when I was doing research about Carver, and I've put Carver in it because I wanted to use a quote from Carver. You'll recognize Carver's voice here. Again, the poem is called Coincidence. This is something that happened on the 15th of February in 1898. In Wakefield, the night train screeches to a neck-wrenching halt. Last, the explanation reaches the colored compartment, where Dr. Carver guards in a valise his jars of before and after soils and of compost, his giveaway bags of raw peanuts. Hearing down the car's long voice brigade a cry for help, He wonders what in all creation could make a whole family sit on the tracks to try to kill themselves. He gives thanks for the engineer's honed eyes. He looks down at the brown road map printed in his yellow palms. Your life may be the only Bible some people may know. Your life may be the only Bible some people will know. He rises. The train arrives only 2 hours late. I'm sorry I flubbed it. Your life may be the only Bible some people will know. That seems to me to be so fundamental, that such a strong message of how we have to live our lives. And I read 2 other poems about Carver. This is called Bedside Reading. Carver was born a slave, and that fact is important in this poem. I don't think there's anything else you need to know. It's called Bedside Reading. In his careful welter of dried leaves and seeds, soil samples, quartz pebbles, notes to myself, letters, on Dr. Carver's bedside table next to his pocket watch, folded in Aunt Mariah's Bible, the bill of sale. $700 for a 13-year-old girl named Mary. He moves it from passage to favorite passage. 15 cents for every day she had lived. $350 for each son. No charge for 2 stillborn daughters buried out there with the Carver's child. This new incandescent light makes his evening's reading unwaveringly easy if he remembers to wipe his spectacles. He turns to the blossoming story of Abraham's dumbstruck luck, of Isaac's pure trust in his father's wisdom. $700 for all of her future. He shakes his head. When the ram bleats from the thicket, Isaac, like me, understands the only things you can ever really trust are the natural order and the Creator's love spiraling out of chaos. Dr. Carver smooths the page and closes the book on his only link with his mother. He folds the wings of his spectacles and bows his head for a minute. Placing the Bible on the table, he forgets again at first and blows at the light. Then he lies back dreaming as the bulb cools. This is Carver again. It's called The Dimensions of the Milky Way. The dimensions of the Milky Way were discovered by an astronomer named Harlow Shapley in 1918. And in this poem, I'm imagining Dr. Carver reading about this discovery in the newspaper. The dimensions of the Milky Way. Behind the men's dorm at dusk on a late May evening, Carver lowers the paper and watches the light change. He tries to see Earth across a distance of 25,000 light years from the center of the Milky Way, a grain of pollen, a spore of galactic dust. He looks around. That shagbark, those swallows, the fireflies, that blasted mosquito, this beautiful world. 100 billion stars in a roughly spherical, flattened disk with a radius of 100 light years. Imagine that. he catches a falling star. Well, Lord, this infinitesimal speck could fill the universe with praise. George Washington Carver led a weekly Bible class. Every week he taught at Tuskegee Institute. That was something like 40 years. And some of his students have written memoirs about how Carver taught and what he taught. This is one of Carver's teachings in his Bible class. The poem is called Professor Carver's Bible Class. I'd always pictured God as a big old long-bearded white man throned up in the sky, watching and keeping score. I had been told we get harps or pitchfork brimstone when we die. Superstitiously, I watched for signs, living in fear of a great master's wrath. Professor Carver's class gave me the means to liberation from that slavish faith. He taught us that our Creator lives within, yearning to speak to us through silent prayer. That all of nature, if we'll just tune in, is a vast broadcasting system. That the air carries a current we can plug into. Your Creator, he said, is itching to contact you. That Carver poem, Carver got up at 4 o'clock every morning and went out into the woods to, as he called it, commune with the Creator. I believe Carver was practicing contemplative prayer, which is the prayer of silence, the prayer of, other religions tend to call it meditation. Christianity calls it contemplative prayer, the prayer of silence, the prayer of stopping your voices and listening to the silence of God. I'm going to end with a poem, another poem about my friend Abba Jacob, my monk friend. This is a poem about the contemplative life, about learning to listen to that silence, learning to find the voice of God in that inward silence. So again, the poem is called The Contemplative Life. Abba Jacob said, contemplation is both the highest act of being human and humanity's highest language. If the language of things reaches beyond things to designate the absolute, the silent interior mantra bespeaks a profound communion with that someone further than ourselves, and communion within ourselves, for the two go together. When we meditate, we enter paschal mystery, the frontier between death and life. Egyptian mythology has wonderful images of the path from life to death, a great ship that bears us to eternity. Charon is the great passer of Greek mythology, helping souls cross the river Styx from life to death. Christianity turns it around. Christ is the greatest passer, helping us pass from death to life. Contemplative life always makes the passage from death to life, from humanity to divinity. It always takes the risk of being human. There is an extraordinary message from the grave as to what it takes to be human. A letter from a Cistercian monk, one of 7 who had their throats cut by Muslim fundamentalist terrorists in their monastery in the mountains of Algeria about 10 years ago. Their prior left a letter just in case. They knew it was probably coming. They knew they were in great risk. The letter was found and published. Here is how it ends. To the one who will have killed me, and also you, friend of my final moment, who would not be aware of what you are doing, yet this, thank you, and adieu to you, for in you too I see the face of God. Abba Jacob wiped his eyes, interval of bird song from the veranda. He's seeing not an abstract God, but a God who has assumed a face, a God who shows him this face in every one of those Muslim brothers and sisters, including the one who kills him. Contemplative life has no frontiers, and it is the heritage of all humanity. Through contemplation, we enter into communion with everybody, and this leads to service. But that's a subject for another day. Thank you. Go in peace.
You're watching WETN TV, a broadcasting service of Wheaton College. For a copy of this program, please call the Media Resources Department of Wheaton College at 752-5061.